Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is The Untold Morning Routine of 1800. Maids, you get comfortable. Take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Untold Morning Routine of 1800 Maids. Imagine waking up before the sun has even thought about rising. The world outside is still quiet. The streets are covered in darkness, the air is cold, and most people are still wrapped in warm blankets, unaware that another day has already begun for someone else. Somewhere inside a large house in the 1800s, a maid slowly opens her eyes. She does not wake because she has rested enough. She wakes because her work begins long before anyone else in the household is awake. Her morning does not start with a gentle alarm clock, a peaceful cup of coffee, or a few quiet moments to herself. Her morning begins with responsibility. For thousands of young women working as domestic servants during the 19th century, the first hours of the day belonged not to themselves, but to the families they served. They were the invisible hands that prepared homes before the wealthy residents stepped into their rooms. They were the people who created comfort, cleanliness, and order while remaining almost unnoticed. Their mornings were filled with routines that many people today would find exhausting. But to understand their lives, we must first step into their world. The 1800s were a time of enormous change. Cities were growing. Industrialization was transforming society. Wealthy families built larger homes, and these homes required more workers to maintain them. Behind the polished doors of elegant houses were kitchens filled with activity, servant staircases hidden from guests, and small rooms where maids slept after long days of work. A maid's life depended greatly on where she worked. Some served in wealthy mansions, where dozens of servants worked together. Others worked in smaller middle-class homes, where one or two servants were responsible for almost everything. But regardless of the size of the household, one thing was often the same. The day started extremely early, before breakfast was served, before fires were burning brightly, before the family members walked downstairs. The maids were already moving. In many homes, the first task of the morning was waking the house itself. During the 1800s, modern heating systems did not exist in the way we know them today. Many rooms depended on fireplaces or coal-burning stoves. So one of the earliest duties was preparing the fire. A maid would leave her small sleeping area and quietly move through the cold corridors. The house that looked beautiful during the day could feel completely different in the early morning. The wooden floors were cold, the rooms were dark. The silence was broken only by footsteps and the sounds of work beginning. She would collect coal or firewood, clean yesterday's ashes, and carefully prepare the fireplace so warmth could slowly return to the rooms. This simple task required strength and patience. Coal dust could cover her hands and clothing. Smoke could fill the room. And yet, this was only the beginning of the day. After the fires were prepared, another important duty followed: cleaning. To modernize, cleaning a large house might seem simple, but in the 1800s, Without vacuum cleaners, washing machines, or modern cleaning products, maintaining a home required physical effort. Floors had to be swept by hand. Rugs had to be beaten outside to remove dust. Furniture needed polishing. Windows needed cleaning with basic tools and homemade solutions. Every object in the house demanded attention. A wealthy family's home was a symbol of status. A shining table, spotless floor, and perfectly arranged room showed the world that the household was successful. But behind that appearance was the quiet labor of servants. Many maids worked while the owners of the house were still asleep. They prepared bedrooms without making noise. They opened curtains. They carried fresh water for washing. They arranged clothing. They removed yesterday's signs of daily life. A bedroom that appeared naturally perfect was often the result of someone's early morning effort. For a maid, privacy was rare. Even the bedrooms of wealthy families required constant attention. Beds had to be made carefully. Sheets had to be stretched smoothly. Pillows had to be arranged. Blankets had to be folded neatly. Small details mattered. A wealthy employer might never think about who performed these tasks. But the maid knew every corner of the room. She knew which floorboards made sounds. She knew which objects needed special care. She knew the daily rhythm of the household better than many people living inside it. The morning routine was not only physical work. It also required discipline. A maid had to remember countless instructions. Which family member preferred tea? Which room needed cleaning first? Which clothing needed repair? Which guest was expected? Which tasks could wait and which could not? A mistake could bring criticism. For many servants, keeping quiet and avoiding attention was considered part of being professional. They were expected to be present, but almost invisible. This created a strange reality. They were essential to the household, yet often unnoticed. Their work shaped the comfort of others, while their own comfort was rarely considered. Breakfast preparation was another major part of the morning. In wealthy homes, breakfast was not simply a meal. It was a carefully organized event. Food had to be prepared. Tables had to be arranged. Dishes had to be polished. Tea or coffee had to be served. The kitchen became a place of constant movement. Cooks prepared meals, while kitchen maids carried supplies, cleaned surfaces, and assisted wherever needed. The smell of freshly baked bread, warm drinks, and cooking food slowly filled the house. But the people creating this comfort often had little time to enjoy it themselves. A servant's own breakfast was usually simple and taken quickly. They ate after important tasks were completed. Their meal was not the center of the morning. Their work was. For many young women, becoming a maid was one of the few employment opportunities available, especially for those from poor families or rural areas. Domestic service provided food, shelter, and wages. But it also demanded long hours and strict obedience. Some girls entered service when they were teenagers. They learned skills from older servants. They learned how to clean, cook, sew, organize, and manage household duties. For some, it became a lifelong occupation. For others, it was a temporary stage before marriage or another form of employment. Yet every morning they repeated the same pattern. Wake early. Work quietly. Prepare the home. Serve others. Continue until the day was nearly finished. The world outside was changing rapidly during the 1800s. Factories were growing. Cities were expanding. New inventions were appearing. But inside many homes, the daily routine of servants remained connected to older traditions. A maid's morning represented a hidden side of history. It was not found in grand speeches or famous events. It existed in small actions. A fire being lit before dawn, a floor being swept while the family slept, a breakfast table being prepared before anyone arrived. These moments may seem ordinary, but they reveal the lives of people who helped create the comfort of another era. And as the morning slowly arrives over the 19th century household, the maid's work is only beginning. Because after preparing the house for the day, countless more duties are waiting. The rooms must be cleaned, the clothes must be cared for, the family must be served. And behind every elegant home of the 1800s, there is a story of the women whose labor kept that world running. A story that was rarely written down, a story that remained hidden for generations, a story that begins every morning, long before sunrise. As the morning light slowly reaches the windows of the 1800s household, the maid's work continues without pause. For many people living in that era, the beginning of the day meant comfort. A warm room, a prepared breakfast, clean clothing, a peaceful home. But behind each of these simple comforts was a long chain of careful work performed by servants who had already been awake for hours. The maid's morning was not only about cleaning, it was about maintaining an entire world. A world where every object had its place, every routine had its time, and every mistake could disturb the balance of the household. After the fires were burning and the bedrooms were prepared, one of the next important duties was helping the family members begin their day. In a wealthy home, waking someone was not as simple as opening a door and saying good morning. There were traditions and expectations. A maid might quietly enter a bedroom, carrying fresh water for washing. Before modern plumbing became common, many people depended on wash basins and pitchers that servants prepared each morning. The maid would bring clean water, remove used items, and make sure everything needed for the morning routine was ready. This required careful attention. The temperature of the water mattered. The arrangement of personal items mattered. Even small details could show whether a servant was considered skilled. A well-trained maid understood that service was not only about completing tasks. It was about anticipating needs before they were spoken. She learned the habits of the people she served. She knew who liked their curtains opened early. She knew who preferred extra time before breakfast. She knew which family member needed clothing prepared first. The best servants were often described as almost invisible, not because they were unimportant, but because their work was so smooth that people barely noticed it happening. This idea of being invisible shaped much of domestic service during the 1800s. Servants were expected to move quietly. They were trained not to interrupt conversations. They avoided unnecessary sounds. They learned how to enter and leave rooms without drawing attention. The household was designed around the comfort of the employers. Even the architecture reflected this separation. Many large houses had servant staircases and back entrances. These allowed servants to move around the home without disturbing the family or guests. A visitor might walk through beautiful rooms filled with expensive furniture and carefully arranged decorations. They might never see the narrow passages, small kitchens, and hidden areas where servants spent most of their time. The polished appearance of the house was only one side of the story. The other side was filled with early mornings, tired feet, and endless responsibilities. One of the most demanding parts of a maid's morning was clothing preparation. In the 1800s, clothing required much more care than many people imagine today. There were no modern washing machines, no quick drying systems, no easy replacement of damaged clothing. Garments were valuable and needed regular maintenance. A maid might brush clothing, remove dust, repair small damages, and prepare outfits according to the household schedule. For wealthy women, clothing could involve several layers. Dresses, undergarments, accessories, and other items all needed attention. A servant helping with clothing needed patience and skill. A single mistake could damage expensive fabric. Sewing was an important skill for many maids. A small tear could not simply mean throwing something away. Clothing was repaired, adjusted, and reused. Many servants became highly skilled with needles and thread because maintaining clothing was part of everyday life. The morning also involved preparing rooms for visitors. In wealthy households, guests could arrive unexpectedly. A sitting room had to look perfect. Chairs needed arranging. Tables needed polishing. Fireplaces needed attention. Everything had to appear effortless. The guests saw the result. They rarely saw the preparation. This pattern existed throughout servant life. The final appearance was always visible. The work behind it was usually hidden. But not every maid worked inside a grand mansion. Many worked in ordinary homes where life was very different. A young woman employed in a smaller household might have fewer servants around her. Instead of specializing in one task, she might do everything. She could prepare meals, clean rooms, wash clothes, care for children, and complete household errands. Her morning could become a continuous cycle of duties. There was no separate department for cleaning, no large kitchen staff, no assistant to share the workload. She carried many responsibilities alone. For some women, domestic service offered stability. They received a place to sleep and regular meals. For someone from a poor background, this could be an important opportunity. But the personal cost was high. Long working hours meant little free time. Many servants had limited opportunities for education. Their lives were organized around the needs of the household. A maid's relationship with her employer could vary greatly. Some employers treated servants with kindness and respect. Others were strict and demanding. The experience depended on the household, the personality of the employer, and the social attitudes of the time. The 1800s had very clear divisions between social classes. A servant was expected to know their position. They were part of the household, but they were not considered equal members of the family. This separation influenced every part of daily life. Where they entered, where they ate, where they slept, how they spoke, how they dressed. Even the timing of their meals often reflected their position. While the family enjoyed breakfast together, servants usually waited until their duties allowed them to eat. Their morning was built around preparing someone else's morning. And yet, within these difficult conditions, many maids developed incredible skills. They became experts at organization. They learned household management. They mastered cooking, cleaning, sewing, childcare, and communication. Some later used these skills to become housekeepers or manage larger households. Their work required intelligence and adaptability. It was not simply physical labor. It was a complex system of knowledge passed from one generation of servants to another. As the sun rises higher above the 19th century streets, the maid's morning has already contained hours of effort. But the busiest part of the day is still ahead. The house is awake now. The family has begun their activities, and the maid must continue moving quietly through the rooms, carrying out the countless tasks that keep the household alive. Because behind every elegant breakfast, every clean room, and every peaceful morning of the 1800s, there was someone working before dawn. Someone whose name might never appear in history books. Someone whose story was almost forgotten. But someone whose daily life reveals a fascinating hidden world. A world of discipline, endurance, and silent dedication. As the household slowly becomes fully awake, the quiet preparation of the early morning transforms into the constant rhythm of daily service. The sounds of the house begin to change. Footsteps move across wooden floors. Doors open and close. Voices begin to fill the rooms. The fireplaces burn steadily. The smell of breakfast spreads through the home. For the family living upstairs, the day has just started. For the maid working behind the scenes, many hours have already passed. But there is no moment to stop. A servant's morning was not divided into neat sections like modern work schedules. There was rarely a clear beginning and ending. One task naturally flowed into another. Cleaning became preparation. Preparation became serving. Serving became more cleaning. The work continued throughout the day. One of the most important responsibilities during the morning was maintaining the appearance of the home. In the 1800s, a clean and organized house was more than a personal preference. For wealthy families, it represented reputation and social standing. A visitor entering a home would immediately notice the details. Was the furniture polished? Were the floors clean? Were the curtains arranged properly? Was the room warm and comfortable? Every small detail reflected the household, and every small detail required someone's effort. A maid would carefully dust surfaces using cloths and simple cleaning materials. Dust was a constant enemy. Without modern air filtration or advanced cleaning equipment, dust entered homes easily. It settled on furniture, decorations, and floors. Keeping a house clean required daily attention. A room that looked untouched often required hours of work. Polishing furniture was another regular duty. Wooden tables, chairs, cabinets, and other pieces needed care to maintain their appearance. A maid had to understand different materials. Too much pressure could damage delicate surfaces. The wrong cleaning method could ruin expensive items. Experience was learned through practice. Older servants often taught younger maids these skills. Domestic service had its own form of training. Knowledge was passed from one person to another. A young girl entering service might not know how to manage a large household, but over time, she learned. She learned how to organize her time. She learned how to work efficiently. She learned how to handle difficult situations. She learned the unspoken rules of the house. Another major part of the morning was laundry. Clothing care in the 1800s required enormous effort. Today, washing clothes can be completed with the press of a button. But during this period, laundry was physically demanding. Water had to be collected. Clothes had to be soaked, scrubbed, rinsed, and dried. Heavy fabrics became even heavier when wet. A servant responsible for laundry needed strength and patience. White clothing was especially challenging. Keeping fabrics clean without modern detergents required careful methods. Many households used homemade mixtures and traditional washing techniques. The process took hours, sometimes an entire day. For many maids, laundry was one of the most tiring household responsibilities. And yet, clean clothing was expected. The family members might never think about the effort behind their freshly washed garments. They simply expected them to be ready. This was one of the quiet realities of servant life. The result was visible. The work was hidden. Childcare was another responsibility that often began early in the morning. Many wealthy families employed nursery maids, whose main duty was caring for children. Their mornings were different from other household servants. They prepared children for the day. They helped them wash and dress. They organized lessons and activities. They watched over their behavior. For some servants, caring for children created a stronger emotional connection. A nursery maid might spend years raising children from infancy. She could become an important figure in their lives. However, she still remained a servant. The affection between a child and a maid existed within the boundaries of social class. It was a complicated relationship. The child might love and trust the maid, but society still viewed her as an employee. The kitchen was another world within the household. While the family enjoyed the finished meal, the kitchen servants experienced the reality of preparation. Morning cooking required organization. Ingredients had to be ready. Fires had to be maintained. Tools had to be cleaned. Meals had to arrive at the correct time. A kitchen maid often worked closely with the cook. She assisted with preparation, cleaning, carrying supplies, and managing the constant activity of the kitchen. In larger homes, kitchen roles were divided. There could be a cook, kitchen maid, scullery maid, and other workers. Each had specific duties. The scullery maid often performed some of the hardest tasks: cleaning dishes, scrubbing pots, maintaining kitchen areas, handling dirty work that others avoided. The word maid covered many different positions. Not every servant had the same experience. Some had specialized roles. Others carried the entire responsibility of a household. The size of the home, wealth of the employer, and number of servants greatly influenced daily life. For a young maid, learning the household routine was essential. Every home had its own system, the order of tasks, the expectations of employers, the habits of family members. Nothing was random. A successful servant understood the rhythm of the house. She knew when to be present. She knew when to disappear. She knew how to complete work without disturbing the people around her. This skill required observation and memory. A maid's morning was a constant exercise in awareness. She listened. She watched. She remembered. Although servants were often overlooked, their knowledge of household operations was impressive. They understood how homes functioned from the inside. They managed schedules. They maintained supplies. They solved everyday problems. In many ways, they were the people who kept the household running. As the morning moves toward midday, the house begins to settle into its normal routine. The family members continue with their activities. Guests may arrive. Letters may be delivered. Plans for the day may unfold. But somewhere nearby, the maid continues her work. She moves through the halls. She carries out tasks that few people notice. She creates comfort that others simply accept. Her morning began in darkness. It continued through hours of physical effort, and still, the day is far from finished, because the life of an 1800s maid was not only about the early hours before sunrise, it was about an entire existence built around service, responsibility, and endurance. A hidden world that existed behind the doors of beautiful homes. A world waiting to be discovered. As the morning continues and the household settles into the rhythm of the day, the maid's responsibilities begin to reveal something deeper about life in the 1800s. Her work was not simply a collection of chores. It was a carefully organized system that allowed an entire household to function. Every room, every meal, every piece of clothing, and every daily routine depended on someone's effort. And much of that effort came from women whose names were rarely remembered. The life of a maid was shaped by time. Time was one of the most important things in a 19th century household. Meals had to happen at specific hours. Rooms had to be prepared before guests arrived. Clothing had to be ready before important events. Fires had to be maintained according to the weather. A small delay could affect the entire household. Because of this, maids learned to measure their days carefully. They developed an internal sense of timing. They knew how long it took to clean a room. They knew how long laundry would require. They knew when the family would need assistance. Their mornings were filled with constant movement. But this movement was controlled. A skilled maid did not rush without purpose. She worked efficiently. She learned the fastest ways to complete difficult tasks. Experience transformed exhausting work into a carefully practiced routine. For a new servant entering a household, the first weeks could be overwhelming. A young woman arriving from a village or small town might suddenly find herself inside a large home with unfamiliar rules. Everything had expectations. How to speak, how to dress, how to serve food, how to address employers, how to move through the house. Many servants learned through observation. They watched experienced workers. They copied their methods. They slowly adapted to the household's rhythm. Older maids often became teachers for younger ones. They explained which tasks mattered most. They showed how to avoid mistakes. They shared knowledge that was never written in official books. This informal education created generations of skilled domestic workers. A maid's clothing also reflected her position. Many domestic servants wore uniforms or simple clothing that identified their role. The style varied depending on location and household. In wealthier homes, uniforms could be carefully designed. A maid's appearance was considered part of the household's image. Clean clothing, neat hair, and proper behavior were expected. The uniform created a visible boundary between servants and employers. It showed who belonged to the household staff. But behind the clothing was a person with her own hopes, fears, and dreams. Many maids were young women who had left their families behind. Some moved from rural areas to growing cities looking for work. Domestic service was one of the largest forms of employment available to women during the 1800s. For some, it provided independence. They earned wages. They gained skills. They lived away from difficult situations at home. But independence came with limitations. Their working hours could be extremely long. Their personal choices were often restricted. Their private lives were closely connected to the household where they worked. The line between work and personal time was often unclear. Many servants lived where they worked. This meant their employer's home was also their living space. Their bedroom was usually small and located away from the main family areas. A servant might begin work immediately after waking and continue until late evening. The house was always around them. There was no simple separation between professional life and personal life. This created both advantages and challenges. Having a place to sleep and regular meals provided security. But it also meant servants had less privacy. The household could influence almost every part of their daily existence. Despite these difficulties, many maids developed strong friendships with other servants. The servant community inside large houses created its own social world. They shared meals together. They exchanged stories. They supported each other during difficult moments. The kitchen was often a place where servants could relax briefly. Away from the formal rooms of the household, they could speak more freely. They discussed their families. They talked about future plans. They shared experiences from their work. These small moments created connections in an otherwise demanding life. The morning routine also involved maintaining supplies. A maid needed to know what the household had and what it needed. Food supplies had to be monitored. Cleaning materials had to be available. Household items had to be replaced when necessary. In larger homes, senior servants managed these responsibilities. A housekeeper, for example, could supervise other maids and organize the entire domestic staff. The housekeeper was one of the most important positions in a wealthy home. She had experience, authority, and responsibility. She communicated with employers. She assigned tasks. She ensured that standards were maintained. For a young maid, becoming a housekeeper could represent career progress. It was a position earned through years of dedication and skill. Not every servant remained in the same role forever. Some moved between households. Some saved money. Some married and left service. Others continued working in domestic positions throughout their lives. Their paths were different, but their early mornings often shared the same pattern. Wake before others. Prepare the household. Work quietly. Repeat the routine. When we imagine the 1800s today, we often picture grand houses, beautiful clothing, and elegant social gatherings. But those images show only one side of the era. Behind the beauty was a hidden workforce. Women who carried coal. Women who washed clothing. Women who prepared meals. Women who cleaned rooms before anyone entered them. Women who created comfort for people who rarely saw their effort. Their mornings tell a different story of the 19th century. A story of patience. A story of discipline. A story of ordinary people performing extraordinary amounts of work. And as the day moves forward, the maid's responsibilities continue. The morning may be ending, but her work is far from complete. More rooms need attention. More tasks are waiting. More hidden moments of history are still unfolding inside the walls of these old homes. As the morning slowly moves toward the middle of the day, the grand houses of the 1800s begin to show their full activity. The quiet darkness of early morning has disappeared. Sunlight enters through the windows. The sounds of daily life become louder. Family members begin their schedules. Visitors may arrive. Letters may be delivered. Plans for the day begin to unfold. But while the household appears calm and organized from the outside, the work behind that appearance continues. The maid remains in motion. For her, the morning is not a short preparation period. It is the foundation of the entire day. A mistake made in these early hours could create problems later. A missing item, an unprepared room, a forgotten task. Everything mattered. In a large household, even the smallest details were carefully managed. A maid had to understand that her work was connected to everything else happening around her. Preparing a room affected the comfort of guests. Cleaning clothing affected the appearance of the family. Maintaining the kitchen affected every meal. Her responsibilities were like invisible threads connecting the entire household together. One of the important parts of a maid's routine was managing bedrooms after the family had awakened. Once the rooms were no longer needed for sleeping, they had to be restored. Beds were arranged. Used items were removed. Curtains were adjusted. Furniture was cleaned. The room had to return to a perfect condition. In wealthy homes, bedrooms were often filled with valuable objects. Paintings, mirrors, decorative items, and expensive furniture all required careful attention. A maid needed to work around these possessions with great care. She had to clean without damaging, move without disturbing, organize without changing the owner's preferences. This required patience and knowledge. Many servants developed an excellent understanding of the objects around them. They knew which items were fragile. They knew which surfaces required special treatment. They knew how the household liked things arranged. This attention to detail was one of the reasons experienced maids were highly valued. Another important responsibility was caring for household fabrics. During the 1800s, fabrics were everywhere. Curtains, tablecloths, bed coverings, upholstery, clothing. These items collected dust and required regular maintenance. Without modern cleaning technology, keeping fabrics fresh was difficult. Heavy curtains had to be removed and cleaned carefully. Rugs had to be carried outside and beaten to remove dirt. Large household textiles required strength and time. A maid's work demanded physical endurance. She spent many hours standing, lifting, carrying, bending, and moving. The effects of this labor could be felt in the body. Tired hands, sore muscles, exhaustion after long days. Yet the work continued because the household depended on it. For many servants, there was a strong sense of pride in doing their work well. Although society often placed them below the families they served, many maids cared deeply about their abilities. A well-managed home reflected their skill. A beautifully prepared room showed their dedication. A successful day meant they had done their job properly. Domestic service also required emotional control. A maid had to remain polite even when tired. She had to remain calm under pressure. She had to manage difficult situations without showing frustration. This was especially important in households where servants interacted regularly with employers. Professional behavior was expected at all times. The relationship between employer and servant was complicated. Some employers recognized the hard work of their staff. They provided better conditions and treated servants with kindness. Others viewed servants only as workers who existed to meet household needs. The experience of a maid depended greatly on the household where she worked. One woman might find a supportive environment. Another might experience strict rules and harsh treatment. History contains many different stories because domestic service was not one single experience. Every house had its own atmosphere. Every employer had different expectations. Every servant had a different journey. Another fascinating part of a maid's morning was communication. A servant often became the person who connected different parts of the household. She delivered messages. She carried information. She organized requests. She helped coordinate daily activities. In many ways, servants knew more about household operations than anyone else. They understood the schedules. They knew the habits. They noticed changes. They were observers of everyday life, yet their voices were rarely recorded in historical documents. Most written records from the 1800s focused on wealthy families, famous individuals, and major events. The daily experiences of servants were often ignored. This is why studying their routines today is so important. A simple morning task can reveal an entire social system. A bucket of water carried upstairs, a fire prepared before sunrise, a room cleaned before the family entered. Each action tells a story. It tells us about technology. It tells us about class. It tells us about gender roles. It tells us about the hidden labor that supported society. The morning routine of an 1800s maid also reveals the difference between appearance and reality. A beautiful home could suggest ease and comfort, but maintaining that beauty required constant effort. The polished furniture, the clean clothing, the organized rooms, the warm fireplaces. None of these happened automatically. Someone made them possible. Someone woke up early. Someone worked quietly. Someone repeated the same tasks day after day. And often, that person was a maid. As the afternoon approaches, the household continues its activities. The early morning duties are complete, but new responsibilities begin. There are meals to prepare, rooms to maintain, clothing to manage, people to assist. The day stretches ahead with more work waiting. And behind the elegant walls of the 1800s home, the silent rhythm of service continues. A rhythm created by women whose efforts shaped everyday life, but whose stories were almost forgotten. Their mornings were not simply about chores. They were about survival. They were about skill. They were about creating order in a world that depended on their unseen labor. As the day moves further into the 1800s household routine, the maid's early morning efforts begin to blend into the larger responsibilities of daily life. The sun is now fully above the horizon. The streets outside are becoming busy. Carriages move along the roads. Shopkeepers open their doors. Workers begin their own daily tasks. But inside the large homes of the wealthy, another world continues. A world where every comfort depends on careful preparation. For the maid, there is no clear moment when the morning ends. Her work simply changes form. The tasks that began before sunrise continue in different ways. After bedrooms are cleaned and breakfast duties are completed, attention often turns toward maintaining the rest of the household. The sitting rooms, dining rooms, hallways, and private areas all require care. A maid moves through these spaces with familiarity. She knows where everything belongs. She understands the habits of the people living there. She knows which rooms receive the most attention and which areas are rarely used. In many homes, the dining room was especially important. Meals were social events. A dining table represented hospitality and wealth. Before and after meals, servants carefully prepared and restored this space. Tablecloths were arranged. Silverware was polished. Dishes were placed correctly. Chairs were positioned neatly. The goal was to make everything appear effortless. Guests were meant to feel that comfort simply existed. They were not supposed to think about the hours of preparation behind it. This was one of the defining features of domestic service during the 1800s. The best work was often the work that nobody noticed. A perfectly prepared room looked natural. A perfectly served meal seemed simple. A warm home felt ordinary. But each result was created through discipline and effort. For maids, this required constant awareness. They had to understand not only what needed to be done, but when it needed to be done. Timing was everything. Serving too early could interrupt. Serving too late could disappoint. Cleaning at the wrong moment could disturb the household. A good maid learned the rhythm of the home. She moved around people without becoming a distraction. This ability was considered a valuable skill. Another important part of domestic work was handling household supplies. A large home required careful management of many items. Food ingredients, candles, coal, cleaning materials, linens, personal items. Nothing could simply be taken for granted. A shortage could create problems. A servant might need to inform a housekeeper or employer that something needed replacing. In bigger households, senior servants managed these details. The housekeeper often acted as the connection between the family and the domestic staff. She supervised the maids. She checked the quality of work. She organized schedules. She ensured that the household standards were maintained. For many young servants, the housekeeper represented both authority and experience. She was someone who understood the demands of the profession. She knew how difficult the work could be. She had likely started in a lower position herself. Many experienced housekeepers had spent years learning every aspect of domestic management. They understood cleaning, organization, staff supervision, and household finances. Their position required intelligence and trust. Beyond cleaning and organization, many maids were also responsible for personal assistance. Helping someone prepare for the day required patience and attention. Clothing had to be arranged. Accessories had to be prepared. Personal items had to be available when needed. For wealthy women especially, appearance was an important part of social life. A dress, hairstyle, or accessory could communicate status and identity. The maid helping behind the scenes became part of this process. She contributed to the image presented to the outside world. But while she helped create another person's appearance, her own life was often overlooked. Many servants had limited opportunities to focus on themselves. Their schedules revolved around others. Their time belonged largely to the household. Even moments of rest were carefully controlled. A short break in the kitchen, a quiet conversation with another servant, a few moments away from constant demands. These small moments were valuable. They provided relief from the pressure of daily work. The servant areas of large homes created a completely different atmosphere from the elegant rooms guests saw. The kitchen and servants' quarters were places where workers shared experiences. Here, they could speak more freely. They discussed families. They shared advice. They talked about employers. They remembered home. Many servants came from different backgrounds. Some were born in cities. Others came from villages searching for employment. Their stories were different, but their work connected them. Domestic service created communities of workers who depended on one another. This hidden society inside wealthy homes played an important role in 19th century life. Without these workers, many households could not function. Yet their contribution was often considered ordinary. Their labor was expected rather than celebrated. Looking back today, the morning routine of an 1800s maid reveals a powerful lesson about history. Not every important story belongs to kings, politicians, or famous figures. Sometimes history is found in ordinary moments. A woman carrying water before dawn, a servant preparing a fire in a cold room, a maid cleaning a table before breakfast. These actions may seem small, but together they created the daily life of an entire era. The 1800s were built not only by inventions and famous events. They were also built by countless unnamed workers who kept homes, businesses, and communities running. The maid's morning was a quiet example of this hidden contribution. As the day continues, more duties await. The household will need attention. More meals will be prepared. More rooms will require care. More challenges will appear. And the maid will continue moving through the house, carrying the responsibilities that began long before most people even opened their eyes. Her story is not written in grand monuments. It exists in the forgotten footsteps that once crossed the floors of old homes. Footsteps that began every morning in silence. As the morning slowly gives way to the rest of the day, the life of an 1800s maid continues with a rhythm that few people outside the household ever noticed. The beautiful homes of the 19th century appeared peaceful from the outside. Large windows reflected sunlight. Gardens were carefully maintained. Rooms were decorated with expensive furniture. Guests entered elegant spaces and saw comfort, order, and wealth. But behind those impressions was a constant movement of people whose work created that appearance. Among them were the maids. They were the quiet force that kept the household functioning. By this point in the day, many of the most urgent morning tasks had already been completed. The fires were burning. The family had been prepared. Breakfast had been served. Rooms had been cleaned. But the work of maintaining a home never truly stopped. A maid's attention now turned toward the details that preserved the household's daily order. One of these responsibilities was keeping the appearance of cleanliness throughout the day. In the 1800s, homes became dirty much faster than many people today might imagine. Coal smoke, candle soot, dust from roads, and dirt carried in from outside constantly affected indoor spaces. A house could lose its polished appearance quickly. That meant cleaning was not something done once and forgotten. It was an ongoing process. A maid might return to rooms she had already cleaned earlier in the morning. A fireplace that had been prepared could leave ashes behind. A hallway could collect footprints. A table could need arranging again. The same spaces might require attention multiple times in a single day. This repetition was one of the realities of domestic work. The effort was continuous because cleanliness was temporary. Another challenge was working with the technology of the time. Modern tools that make household tasks easier did not exist. There were no electric appliances, no automatic washing machines, no vacuum cleaners that could quickly remove dirt. Most tasks depended on human strength and careful technique. Sweeping required physical effort. Scrubbing required endurance. Carrying water required strength. Moving heavy objects required patience. A maid's body was one of her most important tools. Her hands, her energy, and her ability to continue working were essential. This physical nature of domestic service shaped the lives of many women. Long hours on their feet could be exhausting. Repeated lifting and cleaning could affect their health. Yet many continued because their wages and employment provided important support. For women without many other opportunities, domestic service could offer a path toward financial independence. A young woman working as a maid could earn money that belonged to her. She could sometimes send part of her wages to family members. She could save for the future. She could build skills that might help her advance. Although the work was difficult, it was also a form of economic participation. For some women, service provided possibilities that were unavailable elsewhere. The morning routine also reveals something about the social structure of the 1800s. Domestic service reflected the relationship between different classes of society. Wealthy families depended on servants to maintain their lifestyle. Servants depended on those positions for employment. It was a system built on unequal relationships, but also on mutual dependence. A large household could not operate smoothly without workers. At the same time, servants had limited control over their working conditions. Their lives were shaped by the expectations of employers. Rules could be strict. Schedules could be demanding. Personal freedom could be limited. A maid's behavior was often judged carefully. Politeness, obedience, and reliability were considered essential qualities. Even small actions could influence how she was viewed. The way she served food, the way she spoke, the way she moved around guests, the way she completed tasks. Everything contributed to her reputation. For experienced maids, professionalism became a source of pride. They understood their work deeply. They knew how to manage difficult situations. They knew how to organize complicated routines. They carried knowledge that required years to develop. A skilled maid was not simply someone who cleaned. She was an organizer, a caretaker, a problem solver, a person who understood the complex machinery of household life. In larger homes, servants often had different roles that worked together. The housemaid focused on rooms and personal areas. The kitchen staff managed food preparation. The laundry workers cared for clothing and fabrics. The footman handled duties connected to serving and transportation. The housekeeper supervised the entire system. Each role depended on the others. The household functioned almost like a small organization. Every person had responsibilities, every task connected to another, and at the center of this system was timing. A meal could not wait. A guest could not be ignored. A room could not remain unprepared. A servant had to constantly think ahead. This ability to anticipate needs was one of the most valuable skills in domestic service. The best servants often knew what was required before anyone asked. They noticed small changes. They remembered preferences. they prepared for future problems. Their work was based not only on physical effort, but also on observation and intelligence. However, despite their importance, many servants remained invisible in historical records. Their names were often missing. Their personal stories were rarely preserved. History frequently remembers the people who owned the grand houses. It remembers architects, politicians, artists, and wealthy families. But the people who maintained everyday life are often forgotten. The maid standing quietly in the background. The woman waking before sunrise. The worker who cleaned the rooms where important conversations took place. These people shaped history in quieter ways. Their contribution was not always dramatic. It was consistent. It was daily. It was necessary. As the afternoon approaches, the maid's routine continues. The early morning darkness is now a distant memory, but the same dedication that began before sunrise remains. The household still depends on her. More responsibilities wait. More tasks need completion. And more hidden stories remain inside the walls of these 19th century homes. Because the true story of the 1800s is not only found in grand events. Sometimes, it begins with the sound of footsteps in a quiet hallway before dawn. Footsteps belonging to someone whose work allowed an entire world to continue. As the day continues inside the 19th century household, the maid's routine reveals another important truth. Her work was not only about cleaning rooms or serving meals, it was about creating a feeling of comfort, a feeling of order, a feeling that everything in the home was exactly where it should be. For the people who lived in these houses, this comfort often felt natural. But for the servants who created it, comfort required endless effort. Every quiet room had a story behind it. Every prepared meal had a person behind it. Every warm fireplace had someone who woke early to make it possible. The maid's morning was the invisible foundation of the household. One of the most challenging parts of domestic service was the need to maintain perfection. In the 1800s, social expectations were extremely important. A wealthy family's reputation could be influenced by the appearance of their home. If guests visited and noticed disorder, it could reflect badly on the entire household. Because of this, servants were expected to maintain high standards every day. There was little room for carelessness. A maid had to remember countless details: the position of furniture, the cleanliness of glassware, the arrangement of decorations, the condition of fabrics, the preferences of each family member. These details might seem small, but together they created the image of a well-managed home. A skilled maid developed an extraordinary memory. She remembered routines without needing reminders. She noticed when something was missing. She recognized when something needed attention. Her knowledge of the household grew with every passing day. Over months and years, she could understand the home almost like a map. She knew which rooms were used most. She knew which areas required extra care. She knew the habits of everyone living there. This deep familiarity was valuable. A new servant might complete tasks correctly, but an experienced maid understood the hidden patterns of the household. She understood what people needed before they asked. Another major part of a maid's life was adapting to different seasons. The routine of a household changed throughout the year. Winter created different challenges from summer. During colder months, fires required more attention. Coal and firewood had to be carried regularly. Rooms had to remain warm. Windows and doors needed careful management to reduce cold air. Winter mornings could be especially difficult. Imagine leaving a warm sleeping area before sunrise and entering a cold hallway. The first task of the day might involve bringing warmth back into the house. The maid's hands would become cold while handling coal or wood. Smoke and ashes were part of the daily reality. Yet this work had to be completed before the family woke. Summer brought different responsibilities. More cleaning was often required because windows were open and dust could enter easily. Gardens and outdoor areas became more active. Guests might visit more frequently. The household rhythm changed with the seasons. A maid had to adjust constantly. Her routine was never exactly the same. The household itself was always changing. Another important aspect of domestic service was communication between servants. In large homes, teamwork was essential. A maid could not complete everything alone. Different workers depended on each other. The cook needed ingredients prepared. The housemaid needed supplies available. The housekeeper needed information from everyone. Good communication helped the household operate smoothly. But communication also had rules. Servants were expected to behave professionally. They had to be careful about what they said and when they said it. The relationship between servants was often close, but the workplace still had a strict structure. Everyone understood their position. Everyone understood their responsibilities. The servants' quarters created a separate world within the home. Away from the formal rooms, servants could relax briefly. They could share meals. They could discuss their lives. They could laugh and tell stories. These moments were important because domestic service could sometimes feel isolating. Many young women working as maids lived away from their families. They missed their homes. They missed familiar faces. The friendships they created with other servants helped them cope with the demands of their work. For some maids, the household became almost like a second family. They spent years, sometimes decades, serving the same people. They witnessed children grow up. They experienced family celebrations and difficult moments. They became silent observers of generations. A maid might know the private history of a household better than almost anyone else. She saw the daily reality behind the public image. She saw happiness. She saw disagreements. She saw changes over time. But she was expected to remain discreet. Confidentiality was an important part of being a trusted servant. The ability to keep household matters private made experienced servants highly respected. A careless servant could damage the reputation of the household. A trustworthy servant could become an essential part of it. This trust was earned slowly. It came through years of reliability. As the afternoon approaches, the maid's work continues. The tasks that began in the darkness of early morning have developed into a full day of responsibility. The world outside may never notice her efforts. People walking past the house may only see the beautiful exterior. They may admire the gardens, the architecture, and the elegance. But inside, countless hours of labor maintain that appearance. The maid represents a forgotten part of history. A person who worked without recognition. A person whose daily actions supported the lives of others. Her story reminds us that history is not only made through famous events, it is also created through ordinary routines, repeated thousands of times. The sweeping of floors, the preparation of meals, the lighting of fires, the careful arrangement of rooms. These simple actions formed the foundation of everyday life. And as another day continues inside the 1800s household, the maid keeps moving forward. Her morning began before sunrise. Her responsibilities continue long after. And behind every elegant home of the era, there remains a hidden story waiting to be remembered. As the day continues inside the 1800s household, the maid's routine enters a quieter, but equally important stage. The urgency of the early morning has passed. The household is awake. The first meals have been served. The rooms have been prepared. But the responsibility of maintaining the home never truly disappears. A maid's work was not measured by one large task. It was measured by hundreds of small actions repeated every day. A curtain adjusted, a surface cleaned, a garment repaired, a room prepared, a message delivered. Each action helped preserve the order of the household. For many servants, this constant attention became a way of life. They learned to notice things that others ignored: a loose thread on a dress, a candle that needed replacing, a piece of furniture that required polishing, a room that needed extra care before a visitor arrived. Their eyes became trained to search for problems before those problems were noticed by anyone else. This ability was especially valuable in large houses where many activities happened at the same time. A wealthy household in the 1800s could almost feel like a small organization. There were schedules to manage, people to coordinate, supplies to control, standards to maintain. The servants were the people who made this system work. Among them, housemaids had one of the most physically demanding roles. They spent much of their day caring for the living spaces of the family, cleaning bedrooms, maintaining furniture, carrying items, organizing personal belongings. The work required patience because many tasks had to be repeated. A room cleaned in the morning could become untidy again by evening. A polished surface could collect dust again. A perfectly arranged space could need attention after only a few hours. The endless nature of cleaning was one of the hidden challenges of domestic service. The result never lasted forever. The work had to be done again and again. Yet repetition also created expertise. A skilled maid knew exactly how to complete tasks efficiently. She understood which methods saved time. She knew how to organize her movements. She learned how to manage several responsibilities at once. Experience transformed ordinary work into a profession. Another important part of a maid's day was caring for household linens. In the 1800s, linens represented cleanliness and comfort. Fresh sheets, clean towels, and well-maintained fabrics were signs of a properly managed home. But keeping them that way required significant labor. Fabric had to be washed, dried, folded, repaired, and stored carefully. A small tear could require sewing. A stain could require special treatment. Items had to be protected because replacing them was expensive. Many servants developed impressive sewing abilities. They repaired clothing, adjusted garments, maintained household textiles. These skills were valuable and often passed down through generations. A young maid might learn sewing from older workers. She might learn how to care for delicate materials. She might learn techniques that were never written in books, but were essential in everyday life. Domestic knowledge was often practical knowledge. It came from experience. It came from observation. It came from years of doing. The social position of maids also shaped how they experienced the household. They lived close to wealth, but were not part of it. Every day, they saw expensive furniture, beautiful clothing, and comfortable rooms. They prepared luxury for others. But their own living conditions were usually much simpler. Their bedrooms were often small. Their meals were usually basic. Their free time was limited. This contrast was one of the defining features of servant life. They existed close to comfort without fully sharing in it. Yet many servants developed their own ambitions. Some hoped to improve their position. Some saved money for the future. Some wanted to become senior servants. Others dreamed of leaving domestic service entirely. A young woman working as a maid was not simply performing tasks. She was building a life within the limitations of her time. Her choices were influenced by social class, available opportunities, and personal circumstances. For some, domestic service became a temporary chapter. For others, it became a lifelong career. The morning routine also reveals something about the relationship between time and labor in the 1800s. Today, many people separate work and personal life. There is a clear beginning and ending. But for live-in servants, these boundaries were often unclear. The household was both workplace and home. Their daily schedule followed the needs of the family. If someone needed assistance, they were expected to respond. If an event required extra preparation, their working hours expanded. Their lives were connected to the rhythm of the household. This could create a strong sense of belonging, but it could also create exhaustion. A servant's dedication was often measured by how much they could handle. The ability to remain calm, organized, and reliable was highly valued. Many maids developed incredible emotional strength. They managed pressure quietly. They solved problems without recognition. They continued working even when tired. Their resilience was one of the reasons households depended on them so heavily. When we look back at the 1800s today, it is easy to focus on the grand images of the era, the elegant dresses, the beautiful houses, the formal dinners, the social events. But those images existed because countless people worked behind the scenes, the maid preparing the rooms, the servant maintaining the kitchen, the worker caring for clothing. The people whose names disappeared, but whose efforts shaped daily life. Their stories remind us that history is not only about the people who were seen, it is also about the people who made everything possible. As the afternoon moves closer to evening, the maid's day continues. The early morning that began in darkness feels far away now, but the same responsibilities remain. The same dedication continues. And inside the walls of the old household, another chapter of her hidden story is waiting to be discovered. Because the life of an 1800s maid was not defined by one morning. It was defined by thousands of mornings repeated over years. Each one beginning before the world was awake. Each one carrying a story that deserves to be remembered. As another long day unfolds inside the 19th century household, the story of the maid continues through the ordinary moments that history often leaves behind. The grand houses of the 1800s were places of beauty and elegance. Visitors saw carefully decorated rooms. They saw polished furniture. They saw perfectly prepared meals. They saw families enjoying a comfortable lifestyle. But behind that comfort was a carefully organized world of labor. A world powered by people who worked quietly from early morning until late at night. The maid was one of those people. Her morning routine was not simply a list of duties. It was a reflection of an entire social system. A system where some people provided comfort and others enjoyed it. To understand her daily life, we must look beyond the beautiful rooms and imagine the person who maintained them. A maid's day required constant adjustment. No two mornings were exactly the same. A normal routine could suddenly change because of unexpected events. A guest arriving, a family member becoming ill, a special dinner being planned, a forgotten request needing immediate attention. The maid had to adapt quickly. Flexibility was one of the most important qualities in domestic service. A servant who could handle unexpected situations became extremely valuable. Experience taught maids how to remain calm when plans changed. They learned how to solve problems without creating more difficulties. They learned how to continue working even when the household became complicated. This ability was often invisible. People noticed mistakes. They rarely noticed all the problems that servants quietly prevented. A well-trained maid could stop small issues from becoming larger ones. She might notice a damaged item before anyone else. She might prepare something before it was requested. She might organize the household so smoothly that everything appeared effortless. This was the true skill behind domestic service. It was not only about completing instructions. It was about understanding the needs of an entire household. The relationship between maids and employers could also change over time. A servant who worked in the same home for many years could become deeply familiar with the family. She might watch children grow from infancy into adulthood. She might witness marriages, celebrations, and difficult moments. She became a quiet observer of family history. But even with this closeness, there were boundaries. Social class shaped relationships. A maid could be trusted and appreciated while still remaining an employee. This created a complicated position. She could be important to the family's daily life, but still separate from their world. For many servants, one of the most difficult parts of the job was the lack of recognition. Their work was essential, but often considered ordinary. A clean room was expected. A prepared meal was expected. Fresh clothing was expected. The effort behind these things was rarely discussed. This is why studying the lives of maids today gives us a different view of the past. It allows us to see the people behind the routines, the people behind the comfort, the people who helped create everyday life. Another important part of a maid's experience was learning the expectations of society. The 1800s placed strong ideas on women's roles. Many women had limited opportunities outside certain forms of work. Domestic service was one of the largest employment options available. For some women, it provided independence and income. For others, it was a difficult necessity. Their reasons for entering service were different. Some needed financial support. Some wanted to escape difficult circumstances. Some followed family members into the profession. Some saw it as a temporary step toward another future. Every maid carried her own personal story. Behind the uniform was an individual person, someone with memories, someone with hopes, someone with fears, someone who had a life beyond the walls of the house. Yet history often remembers only the role, the maid, a simple word that hides thousands of different experiences. There were young women beginning their first jobs, experienced servants managing entire households, women who spent decades serving the same families, women who eventually left service and created new lives. Their stories were different, but their mornings often began the same way. Before sunrise, before breakfast, before the household awakened. The early morning hours reveal the true dedication required by domestic service. Those quiet moments show the reality behind the elegant homes of the 1800s. A maid walking through dark hallways, a fire being prepared, water being carried, rooms being restored, clothing being arranged, a household slowly coming alive because someone worked before everyone else. These moments may seem small, but they represent countless hours of human effort. And when we look closely at history, we discover that ordinary routines can tell extraordinary stories. The morning routine of an 1800s maid shows us a world of discipline, patience, and hidden labor. It reminds us that comfort has always had a cost. Someone always worked to create it. Someone always stood behind it. And for many households in the 1800s, that person was a maid. As the day continues toward evening, more responsibilities remain. The household will need attention again. Meals will need preparation. Rooms will need care. The cycle will continue. Because for these women, the work that began before sunrise was not just a morning routine. It was a way of life, a life filled with forgotten moments, a life built on quiet dedication, a life that deserves to be remembered. As the afternoon slowly moves toward evening, the house begins to change its rhythm once again. The busy energy of the morning has passed, but the maid's responsibilities continue. For many people living in the 1800s, the afternoon was a time for visits, conversations, work, or leisure. But for the servants who maintained these homes, the day was still filled with duties. The morning routine that began before sunrise had created the foundation for everything that followed. The rooms were ready. The family was prepared. The household was functioning. But maintaining that order required constant attention. A maid's work was like a never-ending cycle. Something that was cleaned would eventually need cleaning again. Something that was arranged would eventually need arranging again. Something that was prepared would eventually need to be prepared again. This repetition was one of the defining experiences of domestic service. The work was not about completing one final task. It was about maintaining a standard every single day. A perfectly clean home could become untidy within hours. A freshly polished surface could lose its shine. A carefully organized room could change as people moved through it. The maid's role was to restore that order again and again. This required patience. It required discipline, and it required accepting that much of her work would remain unseen. One of the quieter responsibilities during the day was managing personal items. In wealthy households, family members often owned many possessions. Books, jewelry, letters, clothing, decorative objects. Each item had importance. A maid needed to handle these belongings carefully. Trust was a major part of the relationship between servants and employers. A careless servant could lose that trust quickly. A reliable servant could become someone family depended upon for years. This trust was not gained through one action. It was built through thousands of small moments, returning items to the correct place, keeping private matters confidential, protecting valuable possessions, following instructions carefully. A servant's reputation was created through consistency. Another important part of domestic work was preparing for the evening. Even before the sun went down, preparations often began. Rooms needed attention. Lighting needed to be considered. Fireplaces might require care. Dining areas needed to be organized. In a time before electric lighting, evenings required more planning. Candles and lamps had to be prepared. Their placement mattered. The household needed enough light to continue activities comfortably. A servant's work was closely connected to the technology of the time. Simple things that modern people rarely think about required effort. Creating warmth, creating light, maintaining cleanliness, providing comfort. Each depended on human labor. This gives us a different understanding of everyday life in the 1800s. The past was not only about famous inventions and historical events. It was also about ordinary tasks that people performed every day, tasks that shaped how society functioned. For many maids, the evening brought another round of serving responsibilities. Dinner was often an important event in wealthier homes. Meals could involve careful preparation and formal traditions. Servants needed to coordinate their actions. Food had to arrive at the right moment. Dishes had to be cleared. The dining room had to remain organized. A smooth dinner required teamwork. Behind the quiet conversations of the family, servants were constantly working. They moved carefully. They listened closely. They responded quickly. Their goal was to support the household without becoming the focus of attention. This ability to remain unnoticed was considered a sign of excellent service. Yet behind this quiet behavior were real human experiences. A maid could feel tired. She could miss her family. She could dream of a different future. She could feel proud of her skills. She could experience happiness and sadness like anyone else. The uniform and position did not remove her individuality. Many servants maintained connections outside the household. On rare days off, they might visit friends or family. They might explore the city. They might attend religious services. They might simply enjoy a few hours away from work. These moments were precious, because time outside service was limited. For a live-in maid, the employer's home controlled much of her daily schedule. The boundaries between working hours and personal time were often unclear. This was one of the greatest challenges of the profession. However, domestic service also created opportunities for learning. Many maids developed skills that remained valuable throughout their lives. They learned organization. They learned financial responsibility. They learned cooking, sewing, cleaning, and household management. Some used these skills to improve their positions. A maid could become a senior servant, a housekeeper, or eventually manage a household of her own. The journey was difficult, but advancement was possible. The story of 1800s Maids is therefore not only a story of hardship, it is also a story of ability, a story of adaptation, a story of women who learned to survive and succeed within the opportunities available to them. Their mornings were long, their work was demanding, but their contribution was significant. They helped shape the daily lives of families. They maintained homes that became symbols of an era. They created comfort that allowed others to live with ease. And although many of their names have disappeared, their work remains part of history. As evening approaches, and another day inside the 1800s household moves toward its end, the maid's journey is still not complete. The same person who woke before dawn must now prepare for the final duties of the day. The fires, the rooms, the preparations for tomorrow. Because for many servants, the end of one day was simply the beginning of preparing for the next. Their lives followed a rhythm written not in books, but in daily actions. Quiet actions. Repeated actions. Forgotten actions. Yet these actions tell us something powerful. They tell us about the hidden people who built the everyday world of the past. As another day slowly moves toward its end, inside the 1800s household, the story of the maid returns to where it began. The early morning darkness, the quiet corridors, the first sounds of movement before anyone else was awake. Because for many maids, every day followed a familiar circle. The day ended with preparation for tomorrow, and tomorrow would begin the same way, long before sunrise. The final hours of the evening were often just as important as the first hours of the morning. A household could not simply close for the night and forget about the next day. There were preparations that needed to be completed. Rooms had to be checked. Items had to be returned to their places. Supplies had to be organized. The servants had to make sure that the household would wake smoothly the following morning. This was one of the hidden responsibilities of domestic service. A good servant was always thinking ahead. The work of tomorrow began before today was finished. Before going to sleep, a maid might prepare clothing for the next day. She might check household items. She might make sure everything needed for breakfast was ready. She might help restore order after the activities of the day. The family members could rest knowing that their home was prepared. But that peace came from someone else's continued effort. The contrast between the lives of employers and servants was one of the defining features of the 19th century. For the wealthy family, the home represented comfort and stability. For the maid, the same home represented responsibility. The same rooms had different meanings depending on who entered them. A beautiful bedroom was a place of relaxation for the owner. For the maid, it was a place that required cleaning, organizing, and maintaining. A grand dining room was a place for social gatherings. For servants, it was a place that required preparation and careful attention. The same house contained two different worlds, one visible, one hidden, and both depended on each other. The life of an 1800s maid also reveals the importance of unseen labor throughout history. Many societies remember the people who created famous achievements. They remember leaders, inventors, artists, writers. But everyday life was also shaped by ordinary workers, people who cooked, people who cleaned, people who cared for others, people who performed necessary tasks without recognition. Domestic servants were part of this larger story. Their work allowed other parts of society to function. Without their effort, many households could not maintain the lifestyle associated with the 1800s. The image of a perfect Victorian home was created not only by architecture and decoration, it was created by human hands. Hands that washed, hands that cooked, hands that carried, hands that repaired, hands that worked quietly every day. When we imagine the morning routine of a maid, we should not only imagine the tasks, we should imagine the person. A young woman waking in a small room, someone who may have left her family behind, someone who had her own dreams, someone who experienced happiness, disappointment, friendship, and uncertainty. She was not simply a servant. She was a person living through a changing world. The 1800s brought enormous transformations. Cities expanded, industries grew, technology changed daily life, social ideas slowly began to shift. But inside many homes, traditional patterns continued. The maid remained a familiar figure, a person whose labor connected the old world with the new. Over time, domestic service changed. New technologies reduced some household labor. Social conditions evolved. Employment opportunities expanded. The structure of households transformed. But the stories of those early servants remain important because they show us a part of history that is easy to overlook. They show us how ordinary routines can reveal extraordinary truths. A morning routine may seem simple. Wake up, prepare the house, complete tasks, serve others, continue the day. But behind those actions was a complete life experience, a life shaped by work, responsibility, and resilience. The Untold Morning Routine of 1800s Maids is therefore not only a story about cleaning houses. It is a story about society. It is a story about class. It is a story about women's work. It is a story about the invisible foundation behind everyday comfort. Every morning, before wealthy families opened their eyes, someone was already creating the world they would wake up to. Someone had prepared the warmth. Someone had created the order. Someone had made the home feel ready. And that someone was often a maid. Her footsteps moved quietly through history. Her name may have been forgotten. Her voice may not have been recorded. But her work remains. Because history is not only made in moments of greatness, it is also made in thousands of ordinary mornings. Mornings that began in silence. Mornings filled with effort. Mornings that helped build the world we remember today. As the story of the 1800s Maid continues, we return once again to the quiet hours before sunrise. The world outside is still sleeping. The streets are calm. The houses are dark. But inside a large home, a new day is already beginning. A maid opens her eyes and prepares to step into another long routine. This simple moment represents thousands of mornings experienced by women across the 19th century. Their lives were shaped by repetition. Wake, work, prepare, serve, continue. Yet within that repetition were countless human stories. The morning routine of a maid was not only about duties, it was about endurance. It was about learning. It was about finding a place in a society where opportunities for women were often limited. Many maids entered domestic service when they were very young. Some were teenagers leaving their families for the first time. They entered unfamiliar homes where they had to quickly understand new expectations. They learned the rules of the household. They learned the personality of employers. They learned how to complete tasks properly. The first mornings were often the most difficult. Everything was unfamiliar. The rooms, the routines, the people, the responsibilities. A young servant had to adapt quickly. Mistakes could lead to criticism. Success could lead to trust. Over time, the unfamiliar house could become a place she understood deeply. She learned the sounds of the home. She recognized footsteps. She knew when someone needed assistance. She understood the daily rhythm almost naturally. Experience became her greatest advantage. The older she became in service, the more valuable her knowledge became. A skilled maid was not simply someone who worked hard. She was someone who understood how a household functioned. She knew how to organize. She knew how to solve problems. She knew how to maintain order even during difficult moments. This knowledge was built slowly, one morning at a time. The morning routine also reveals the importance of patience. Many household tasks required waiting. Waiting for water to heat. Waiting for clothing to dry. Waiting for food to prepare. Waiting for instructions. A maid's day required the ability to remain focused through repetitive work. Modern life often celebrates speed. But the 1800s demanded something different. Consistency. Care. Attention. A task completed properly mattered more than a task completed quickly. This careful approach shaped the standards of domestic service. A room was not simply cleaned, it was prepared. A meal was not simply served, it was presented. Clothing was not simply arranged, it was cared for. Every action carried expectations. For servants in wealthy households, appearances mattered greatly. A well-run home reflected the ability of its staff. A poorly maintained home could damage the reputation of the family. Because of this, maids carried a responsibility that extended beyond simple chores. They helped create the public image of the household. They supported the lifestyle that visitors admired, yet their own stories remained mostly hidden. Many historical records mention the families they served, but rarely mention the servants who supported them. This absence created a gap in our understanding of the past. When we study history, it is important to remember not only the people who had power, but also the people whose labor made that power possible. The maid standing quietly in the background was part of the story. The woman preparing a room before an important meeting was part of the story. The servant waking before dawn to create comfort for others was part of the story. Their work may have seemed ordinary, but ordinary work repeated over years can shape an entire society. The morning routine of an 1800s maid also tells us about human strength. These women faced difficult conditions. They worked long hours. They carried heavy responsibilities. They often had little control over their schedules. Yet they continued. They created order from chaos. They maintained homes through changing times. They adapted to challenges. Their resilience was a quiet form of strength, not the kind celebrated in monuments, not the kind written about in newspapers, but a strength found in daily life, a strength shown through persistence. As we look back at their mornings, we begin to see a different image of the 1800s. Not only grand houses and elegant gatherings, but also the people behind those images, the workers who prepared the rooms, the hands that created comfort, the women who carried responsibilities before the rest of the world awakened. Their mornings were long. Their work was demanding, but their contribution was real. And although many names have disappeared from history, the routines they followed continue to teach us about life in another era. Because sometimes the most revealing stories are not found in famous events. They are found in quiet moments. A candle being lit before dawn, a fireplace being prepared, a hallway being cleaned in silence, a maid beginning another day while the world slept. These small moments reveal the hidden foundation of the past, and they remind us that every era is built not only by those who are remembered, but also by those who worked quietly behind them. As the story of the 1800s Maid reaches its final chapter, we return to the beginning of every day, the quiet moments before sunrise, the moment when the world is still and peaceful, the moment when most people are still asleep, unaware that someone has already started working to prepare their day. For the maid, morning was never just a time on the clock. It was the beginning of a responsibility that shaped her entire life. The first sounds inside the house were often not the voices of the family. They were the sounds of service. A door opening quietly, footsteps moving across a cold floor, a fire being prepared, water being carried, a room slowly coming back to life. These small actions created the foundation of the household. Without them, the comfort and elegance associated with many 19th century homes would not have existed. The maid's routine shows us a hidden side of history, a side that existed behind beautiful walls and carefully decorated rooms. It shows us the lives of women who worked before dawn, continued after sunset, and rarely received public recognition. Their work was ordinary in appearance, but its importance was extraordinary. A single morning could include dozens of responsibilities: preparing bedrooms, maintaining fires, cleaning rooms, organizing clothing, assisting family members, preparing meals, managing supplies. Each task required attention and skill. The maid had to remember details that others never noticed. She had to understand the needs of people around her. She had to create comfort while remaining almost invisible. This was the strange reality of domestic service. The better a maid performed her work, the less people noticed the effort behind it. A perfectly prepared home appeared effortless, but nothing about it was effortless. Every polished surface had required time. Every organized room had required care. Every comfortable morning had required someone's early labor. The story of 1800s Maids also reminds us that history is not only created by famous people, it is created by millions of unnamed individuals whose daily actions keep society moving. A servant carrying water, a worker preparing food, a woman cleaning a room before anyone entered. These moments may not appear dramatic, but they represent the reality of everyday life. The maid was part of a much larger story about work, class, and social change. During the 19th century, societies were transforming, cities were growing, industries were expanding. New ideas about women's roles in employment were slowly developing. Yet domestic service remained one of the most common forms of work available to women. For many, It was a difficult path, but it was also a path where they gained skills, earned wages, and built experiences that shaped their futures. Many servants developed abilities that went far beyond cleaning. They became experts in organization. They learned household management. They mastered practical skills. They became problem solvers. Their knowledge had real value. The image of a maid as simply someone performing basic tasks does not tell the full story. Behind that role was intelligence, memory, patience, and adaptability. A successful maid understood people. She understood routines. She understood how to make a complicated household function smoothly. Her work was a form of quiet expertise. And perhaps the most important thing we can learn from these women is the value of unseen effort. Modern life often celebrates visible achievements, but many important contributions happen quietly. They happen in the background. They happen through daily actions, repeated over time. The 1800s Maid represents all those people whose work supports others without always being recognized. Her morning routine was not just about maintaining a house. It was about maintaining a way of life that depended on patience and dedication. Today, when we look at old photographs of grand homes from the 19th century, it is easy to focus on the architecture, fashion, and wealth. But behind those images were real people, people who woke early, people who worked hard, people who carried responsibilities that shaped everyday life. The Maid's story gives those forgotten workers a place in history. It allows us to see beyond the elegant rooms and understand the human effort behind them. The next time we imagine a morning in the 1800s, we should remember the person who was already awake, the person who prepared the warmth, the person who created the order, the person who made the household ready for another day. A person whose name may have been lost, but whose work was never truly forgotten. Because history is not only found in castles, battles, inventions, and famous names. History is also found in quiet mornings, in simple routines, in ordinary people who continued working when no one was watching. And every morning of the 1800s, before the world fully awakened, thousands of maids began their day with the same quiet determination. Their story was hidden for generations. But now, we can finally see it. The Untold Morning Routine of 1800s Maids was not just a story about work. It was a story about life, a story about endurance, a story about the invisible hands that helped build the world of the past. Before the first light of morning reached the streets of the 1800s, there were already people awake. While many families remained asleep in warm rooms, a different kind of life had already begun inside their homes. A maid quietly opened her eyes. She prepared herself for another day of responsibility, another day of creating comfort for others. Her morning began in silence, but the work she performed shaped the entire household. The story of an 1800s maid is not a story about one person. It represents thousands of women whose lives followed similar rhythms across the 19th century. Women who woke before sunrise, women who worked through long hours, women who carried the invisible responsibilities that allowed households to function. Their work was rarely celebrated. Their names were often forgotten. But their contribution was everywhere. It was in the warmth of a room during a cold winter morning. It was in the cleanliness of a carefully prepared home. It was in the clothing that appeared ready without explanation. It was in the meals served at the correct moment. It was in the peaceful appearance of a household that depended on constant effort. The morning routine of a maid teaches us something important about history. The past was not only created by powerful people, it was also created by ordinary people doing necessary work every single day. The people who cleaned, the people who cooked, the people who cared, the people who maintained the small details that made everyday life possible. For many maids, the morning represented both hardship and opportunity. Domestic service could be demanding. The hours were long. The expectations were high. The work could be physically exhausting. But it also provided employment, skills, and a sense of independence during a time when many women had limited choices. A maid could learn abilities that stayed with her throughout life. She could become skilled at organization. She could understand household management. She could develop patience and discipline. She could build relationships and create a future within the opportunities available to her. Her work was not simple. It required knowledge. It required memory. It required emotional strength. A household was a complicated system, and servants were the people who understood how that system operated. They knew the routines. They solved problems. They prevented chaos. They created order. Yet the most fascinating part of their story is that so much of their work happened unnoticed. A guest entering an elegant home saw beauty. They saw comfort. They saw a peaceful environment. They rarely saw the early morning hours that made that comfort possible. They did not see the maid carrying supplies before dawn. They did not see the servant cleaning rooms in silence. They did not see the countless small tasks completed before anyone else began their day. That hidden effort is what makes their stories worth remembering. Because behind every beautiful era, there are people whose labor remains invisible. The 1800s were filled with change. New technologies appeared. Cities expanded. Society transformed. But the daily lives of many working women remained connected to routines that had existed for generations. The maid's morning was a bridge between the old world and the changing world. It showed the reality of work before modern conveniences. It showed the importance of human effort. It showed how much of history was built through ordinary actions. Today, when we think about the 19th century, we often imagine grand houses, formal clothing, and elegant gatherings. But those images tell only part of the story. The complete story also includes the women who woke before everyone else, the women who kept those homes running, the women whose footsteps moved quietly through hallways while history was happening around them. Their lives remind us that every comfortable moment has a story behind it. Every clean room has someone who cared for it. Every prepared morning has someone who created it. Every beautiful home has unseen hands that helped maintain it. The untold morning routine of 1800s maids is therefore more than a look into household work. It is a reminder to look closer at history, to remember the people who were not always recorded, to value the contributions that happened quietly. Because history is not only found in famous names and important events. Sometimes history is found in the smallest moments. A candle being lit, a fire being prepared, a room being cleaned before sunrise, a maid beginning another morning while the world slept. Those moments may have seemed ordinary at the time, but together they created the daily life of an entire era. And now, centuries later, their stories allow us to step into that forgotten world. A world of early mornings, a world of hidden labor, a world shaped by patience, dedication, and quiet strength. The maid's morning has finally been revealed, not as a simple routine of chores, but as a story of the countless women who helped build the everyday world of the 1800s.